Hey guys, tonight we are going to slip quietly into the lamplit streets of Pompeii, where the stones still hold echoes of footsteps, laughter, and whispers from nearly 2,000 years ago. The air is warm and faintly smoky from braziers glowing in the corners of taverns. Around you, painted walls gleam in fading color, their reds and yellows catching the torchlight like an ancient neon sign saying, yes, this city was very much alive. You find yourself wandering toward one of its most notorious destinations, a place so ordinary to the Romans, yet so extraordinary to us now. The brothel, the Lupanar. Now, quick reality check, you probably wouldn't survive long in this neighborhood without at least a few coins and a decent tolerance for cheap wine. Roman street life wasn't exactly forgiving, and the jokes scratched into the walls prove people were just as messy and mischievous as we are. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in, I'd love for you to drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always wild seeing this little time travel experiment stretch across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down a narrow stone street, the grooves of countless cartwheels beneath your sandals. Around you, Pompeii hums. Taverns spill laughter into the night, and you pass vendors with baskets of figs, still hawking their fruit to late-night wanderers. Somewhere a dog barks, and farther off the faint clatter of dice echoes from a gaming den. The city feels restless, as if it never wants to sleep, and you, moving with the crowd, are drawn toward a certain small doorway at the edge of the noise. You keep walking along that darkened street, the torchlight flickering against stucco walls painted with bold reds, ochres, and blues. The nightlife in Pompeii feels almost theatrical. To your left, a tavern spills out raucous laughter as men raise ceramic cups of watered wine, their tunics blotched with spilled drink. Behind them, a server balances a tray of olives and roasted chickpeas, the salty smell mixing with smoky lamp oil. Night here isn't quiet, it's alive, humming, insistent. Mainstream fact, Pompeii had dozens of taverns, snack bars, and inns, often called thermopolia. These were the fast food joints of the Roman world, serving hot food and cheap wine to locals and travelers alike. They often doubled as social spaces, sometimes shading into gambling dens or even unofficial brothels when opportunity knocked. You turn into one such alley and notice painted signs showing a rooster or a wine jug. Romans weren't always big on written menus, so pictures advertised what was on offer. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found phallic symbols carved into pavement stones pointing toward certain taverns. Yes, ancient Rome had literal NSFW street arrows. You follow one, amused as it seems to wink at you from the curb. Somewhere above, shutters bang open and closed as late-night gossipers lean out to watch who's passing. The whole street feels nosy, alive, as if you're walking under 1,000 curious eyes. You catch snippets of arguments. Two dice players shouting about a bad throw, a woman scolding a drunk man to go home, a flute drifting from an upstairs room where someone practices long into the night, and historians still argue whether this Pompeian nightlife was safe or seedy. Was it a cheerful after-hours community, or a tinderbox of petty crime and debauchery? The evidence swings both ways, graffiti full of crude jokes on one hand, but orderly tavern accounts on the other. The truth, you sense, was a mix. A city buzzing with the joy and chaos of humanity. As you walk, the energy tugs you forward, deeper into the heart of Pompeii's after-dark pulse. Somewhere ahead lies the Lupanar, but for now you're still soaking in the prelude. The glow, the gossip, and the irresistible hum of a Roman night. The further you wander, the more the streets themselves begin to guide you. It isn't just chance that leads you toward the brothel. Pompeii left a trail of signs, some subtle, some hilariously blunt. You tilt your head and notice a small carving set into the pavement, a raised relief of a certain unmistakable shape, pointing like an arrow. Yes, the Romans were practical. Why bother writing this way when you could carve a universal symbol guaranteed to get attention? Mainstream fact, Pompeii is famous for its phallic graffiti and carvings scattered across the city. They weren't always about sex. Sometimes they were symbols of luck or prosperity, protective talismans meant to keep evil away. But when you see one carved into the street pointing toward a building, the meaning gets a little more specific. You follow the stone arrow and pass a painted wall. It's splashed with graffiti, names etched by sharp tools, crude sketches of faces, and jokes in shaky Latin. A traveler once scratched in, Felix hic futuit hin. Felix got lucky here. Quirky tidbit, scholars discovered actual lists of ratings and mock reviews scribbled on brothel and tavern walls. The ancient equivalent of 5 stars, would visit again. Imagine Yelp, but carved with a nail. As you walk, more signs appear, a painted figure of Priapus, the god of fertility, balancing an enormous symbol of manhood on a scale with a bag of gold coins. Subtle? Not exactly. Romans had a knack for advertising that was anything but shy, and historians still argue whether every symbol was meant as an actual brothel sign, or whether some were just good luck charms. Some carvings point directly to known pleasure houses, while others might have decorated bakeries or private homes. You imagine archaeologists debating with a straight face whether a loaf of bread or a bed of passion was on the menu. The streets seem alive with these markers, half map, half joke, blending sacred and profane. You feel like you're following a treasure trail, except instead of gold, the X marks a doorway that once promised something else entirely. Ahead, the crowd thins, and the torches flicker lower. The chatter of taverns fades behind you. Now the trail feels deliberate, funneling you toward that small stone threshold waiting in the shadows. You pause before the threshold, and for a moment the hum of the city seems to soften. The doorway of the lupanar isn't grand. It's surprisingly plain, just a worn stone frame and a step polished smooth by countless sandals. Yet the space feels charged, like you've stumbled into a corner of Pompeii, where the walls themselves hold secrets. You take a breath and duck under the low lintel. Inside, the light changes. Oil lamps flicker against plaster walls, their flames jittering shadows across painted surfaces. The air smells of warm stone, smoke, and a hint of something musky, perfume mingled with sweat and cheap wine. You blink and your eyes adjust to the gloom, catching glimpses of frescoes glowing faintly, images meant to tease or instruct, depending on who you ask. Mainstream fact, the lupanar in Pompeii was purpose-built as a brothel. Unlike many taverns or inns that doubled as such, it had a clear layout of small rooms, narrow corridors, and a central hallway. Its design left no doubt about its function, even if its plain doorway might have tricked an outsider into thinking it was just another house. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists discovered tiny grooves in the stone step at the entrance, suggesting people leaned or sat there, waiting for their turn, or maybe just gossiping. Imagine a line outside, like the ancient equivalent of a nightclub queue, minus the velvet rope and with more goats in the background. As you step fully in, the sounds of the city muffled outside, you feel how cramped the space is. The rooms are barely larger than closets, each with a narrow stone bed covered long ago with straw or thin mats. The walls are close, as though the architecture itself wanted to remind you. This wasn't about comfort, it was about speed and turnover, and historians still argue whether the doorway was deliberately unremarkable to keep things discreet, or whether brothels didn't need flashy signs, because everyone already knew exactly where to go. Either way, the step across that threshold marked more than stone. It was the boundary between public street life and an intimate, transactional world that the Romans kept both visible and veiled. You linger there, oil lamps flickering on your skin, realizing that even in its quiet ruin, the lupanar still knows how to draw you in. You wander deeper into the lupanar, letting your fingers brush the cold plaster. The walls seem to hum with stories, though the voices have long since faded. Then you see them. Painted panels spaced above the doorways of the tiny rooms. Each fresco glows faintly in the lamplight. preserved in shocking clarity despite nearly 2 millennia of silence. The images aren't subtle. Couples in various embraces, captured mid-motion. Their limbs twisted into poses that look suspiciously like a gym class gone very, very wrong. Some are tender, some playful, and others, well, you tilt your head and wonder if Roman chiropractors had a booming side hustle. Scholars believe these frescoes might have been a kind of ancient menu, allowing customers to point and choose without awkward small talk. Imagine being spared the, "So, what do you offer?" moment, efficiency at its finest. Mainstream fact, the Pompeii lupanar contained about 24 of these erotic frescoes, each painted in a small rectangular panel above the door frames. Their placement was intentional, directing attention toward the private rooms and linking the art to the activities inside. Quirky tidbit. One fresco shows a couple balancing in a position so improbable that modern yoga instructors might file a patent. Some researchers suggest the paintings weren't just titillation, but also advertising. Like a neon sign, except instead of open late, you got an acrobatic depiction of passion. As you gaze, you notice the artistry isn't uniform. Some panels look carefully executed with shading and perspective, while others resemble the doodles of a bored teenager. Historians still argue whether all the frescoes were made by skilled artists, or if some were slapped together in haste. More practical than aesthetic, was the lupanar commissioning high art, or was it simply checking off a basic decor box? You picture ancient clients tilting their heads, squinting up at the walls, perhaps chuckling or debating which panel matched their tastes. And just like that, the frescoes come alive again, not dusty museum pieces, but the ancient equivalent of scrolling through a menu at a fast food joint, except this one required payment in denarii and didn't come with fries. The walls hold your gaze a little too long until you realize your feet have carried you further down the corridor, each fresco a step deeper into this shadowed world. You pause at the threshold of one of the cramped stone chambers. The doorframe is narrow and you duck inside, brushing past the rough wall. The air is heavier here, stale even after centuries. The room is little more than a stone cell, bare except for a low masonry bed jutting out from one wall. It's topped with a layer of plaster, hard and unforgiving. You tap it with your knuckles and the dull thud makes you wince. Imagine lying down after a long day only to discover that the mattress is essentially the floor, with commitment issues. Yet this was the standard furnishing of a Pompeian brothel. Cushions or straw mats would have softened the surface, but the base remained stone, functional, easy to clean, and enduring enough that it greets you across time. A carved groove runs along the edge, perhaps to hold a thin mattress in place or to keep things from sliding off. Practicality above all, though you can't help but think, so much for comfort. Mainstream fact, most rooms in the lupanar measured about 2 by 3 meters, barely enough space for 2 people, and a flickering oil lamp. Privacy was minimal, walls were thin, doors were simple curtains, and the sounds of neighboring rooms likely bled together in an overlapping chorus. Quirky tidbit, some beds still show traces of graffiti scratched into the plaster surface. Names, boasts, crude drawings. It's as if ancient visitors couldn't resist leaving behind their Yelp reviews, except instead of stars and comments, you got a hastily carved doodle. You trail your hand along the ceiling. It's low, pressing down on the space, and you realize how claustrophobic it must have felt. The flicker of a single lamp would have barely held back the dark. Historians still argue whether the cramped design was intentional, meant to keep customers moving along quickly, or whether space was just too limited in Pompeii's bustling urban layout to allow for luxury. Either way, you wouldn't call this 5-star accommodation, unless the 5th star was chipped off and lying in the dust somewhere. A faint chill runs through you as you picture the room alive again. A woman's laughter, a man's nervous cough, the quick murmur of bargaining. The stone bed looms as both stage and prop, cold and unyielding. You step back out into the hall, grateful for the fresher air, even if the frescoes are still smirking down at you. You ease back into the hallway, and your eyes drift to the faint scrawls etched across the plaster. At first they look like scratches, random and meaningless, but as you lean closer you realize these are words, ancient voices carved into the wall, stubborn enough to survive the volcanic ash. The graffiti of Pompeii has been called the city's social media feed, a sprawling collection of love notes, insults, jokes, and shameless advertisements left for anyone with eyes to see. Here in the Lupanar, the tone is predictably on brand. You see names scratched into the plaster, women boasting of their charms, men bragging about their visits. Some inscriptions are surprisingly poetic, little bursts of affection that suggest real bonds, while others read like crude one-liners you'd find scrawled in a bathroom stall. Imagine an ancient Roman with a stylus thinking, "This will get some laughs," and carving out a quip for eternity. Mainstream fact: archaeologists have cataloged over 150 graffiti inscriptions inside the Lupanar alone. Many are written in vulgar Latin, the everyday slang of Pompeii, far from the polished prose of Cicero. This makes them invaluable for understanding how ordinary people actually spoke. Quirky tidbit: one famous inscription reads something like, "I had lots of fun here with the girl from the second room on the left." It's essentially the ancient version of tagging your location on Instagram, except instead of a geotag, you get directions as if someone might actually follow up. You tilt your head at a cluster of overlapping names. Some belong to women, possibly workers marking their presence. Others are likely customers who wanted to immortalize their night. Historians still argue whether these inscriptions were tolerated by the owners as free marketing or scratched in secret, a form of rebellious self-expression. Was it graffiti as endorsement, or graffiti as graffiti? Spontaneous, cheeky, and just a little bit inappropriate? The walls suddenly feel less like ruins and more like a crowded message board, layered with voices. You imagine the chuckles, the groans, the eye rolls that must have greeted some of these inscriptions. Even 2,000 years later, you can almost hear the rhythm of human mischief in every line, and really it's comforting. Ancient or modern, people have always found a way to write, "I was here." You wander deeper into the space and your eyes catch flashes of color on the walls. At first you think it's just chipped plaster catching the light, but then you realize it's something far more deliberate. Frescoes. The walls of the Lupanar are decorated with painted panels, each one depicting a different scene of intimacy. Think of them as advertisements, but also as instruction manuals, visual menus for clients who might not share a common language. Mainstream fact: scholars believe these frescoes weren't random art pieces, but carefully chosen images, possibly guiding patrons toward what services were offered in each room. For a multilingual port city like Pompeii, with sailors from across the Mediterranean, pictures spoke louder than words. Quirky tidbit: some frescoes show positions that made later Victorians clutch their pearls and demand curtains. But here, the Romans painted them openly, almost casually, in bright pigments. It's like walking into a diner where the menu isn't just written on the wall, it's acted out by little cartoon figures. The colors, though faded, still shimmer faintly. Reds, yellows, and blues bleed through the centuries, surprisingly vibrant despite the eruption's attempt to smother them. You lean close and you notice the brushstrokes are simple, not masterworks meant for palaces, but bold and clear for fast recognition. The walls here weren't aiming for gallery prestige, they were built for practicality, clarity, and maybe a little flair. Historians still argue whether the frescoes were coded advertisements, Room 3 specializes in this, or simply generic decoration meant to set a playful tone. Were they literal, or more atmospheric, the way a modern spa hangs calming landscapes? Nobody can say for certain, and the debate keeps academic conference panels lively. Standing there, you can't help but think how the bright art must have transformed the dim rooms, throwing splashes of color against the otherwise plain stone. For a client stepping in, nervous and clutching a few coins, the frescoes might have provided a strange sort of reassurance. This was a space that didn't shy away from showing exactly what it was about. And in that way, the walls still speak. Even now, with their pigment dulled and their edges broken, they whisper an ancient marketing trick. Make the customer feel like they already know what they're in for. You let your fingertips hover just above the faded frescoes, careful not to touch, and your gaze drops to the ground. The floor is plain, simple stone, worn smooth from countless sandals, but you know the real action wasn't in the flooring. It was in what you might step into. Imagine the hum of the street outside, the shuffle of clients pushing through the doorway, and the persistent smell that no fresco could mask. Mainstream fact: Roman brothels were not perfumed palaces of silk and wine. They were cramped, functional, and often smelled of sweat wine, smoke, and worse. Archaeological studies suggest that strong odors were part of daily life in Pompeii, from open sewers to smoky hearths. Quirky tidbit: some archaeologists joke that the brothel probably had its own signature scent, a mixture of olive oil lamps, damp plaster, and people. The smell might not exactly line up with our romanticized ideas. You picture a tourist candle labeled Pompeii Nights, and the result is less than marketable. As you shift your weight, you notice how small the rooms truly are. Each cell barely holds a bed platform. Privacy was more suggestion than guarantee. The walls are thin, the doorways narrow, and there's no ventilation to speak of. You imagine muffled voices, laughter, and maybe even arguments slipping from one space to the next. The experience must have been communal in ways we'd call awkward today. Historians still argue whether the conditions in Pompeii's Lupanar represented the norm for Roman brothels, or if this was a particularly low-tier version. Some point to the elaborate frescoes as evidence that it was a relatively organized establishment, while others argue the cramped and unsanitary quarters reveal it was cheap and accessible to sailors and laborers. You stand in the doorway and breathe shallowly, grateful that centuries of ash have muted whatever pungent cocktail once lingered here. Yet, in imagining it, you glimpse the full humanity of the place, not glamorous, but undeniably real. The Lupanar wasn't built for comfort, it was built for business. And still, despite the smells, the noise, and the sweat, people came. People always came. Your gaze drifts back to the small stone platforms in each room. Beds, if you can call them that. They look more like masonry benches, hard and unwelcoming, as though someone forgot that human bodies are meant to lie on them. These were the main furnishings of the Lupanar, simple slabs probably topped with straw mattresses or blankets that have long since vanished. You picture them lumpy, scratchy, and about as comfortable as a futon left out in the rain. Mainstream fact: archaeological surveys show that nearly every room in the Lupanar had one of these raised masonry beds, a uniform design that suggests efficiency rather than luxury. Unlike Roman homes where wooden furniture was common, these stone bases survived the eruption, leaving little doubt about their role. Quirky tidbit: some scholars think the stone beds might have doubled as storage when not in use, with straw or cloth rolled up in corners. Imagine a worker tidying up, casually stashing laundry or wine jars under the same slab, where clients would later sprawl. It's not exactly the kind of hotel turn-down service you'd expect. You crouch slightly, picturing the logistics. The rooms are so narrow that you'd barely have space to stretch your arms. Privacy curtains might have hung in the doorways, maybe made of linen or wool, swaying slightly whenever someone passed. Historians still argue whether each room's furnishings were deliberately austere, meant to keep visits quick and transactional, or whether some might once have included cushions, painted wooden stools, or even lamps to create a more inviting atmosphere. The uniformity of the stone beds tells you this was a workplace first and foremost. They weren't meant for lingering, only for brief encounters before another client arrived. You imagine how starkly different it must have felt from the luxurious couches of a Roman triclinium, where guests feasted for hours. Here you wouldn't stretch out for a banquet, you'd perch awkwardly, conduct your business, and move along. And yet, despite their simplicity, those stone slabs carry echoes of countless lives. People laughed here, argued here, made arrangements here, maybe even shared fleeting moments of tenderness. Cold stone, yes, but warmed by human presence over and over again. You leave the cramped room and step back into the dim hallway, where the flickering of oil lamps would once have guided clients through the brothel's narrow passages. Without electricity, light came from small terracotta lamps, fueled by olive oil, their flames dancing wildly in the draught. The glow would have been golden but weak, casting long shadows across the frescoed walls, making painted figures seem to move as if performing under torchlight. Mainstream fact, Romans relied heavily on olive oil lamps for everyday lighting, and in spaces like the lupanar, they were placed in niches or set on shelves to illuminate the way. Archaeologists have found dozens of lamp fragments in Pompeii, many decorated with playful or risque motifs that fit right into the setting. Quirky tidbit, one lamp design popular in the Roman world depicted a gladiator mid-swing, while others featured mythological creatures, or more bluntly exaggerated anatomy. Imagine fumbling down the hallway with only the glow of a lamp shaped like a naked satyr to guide you. Romantic? Not exactly, but certainly memorable. You can picture the atmosphere now. Smoky air thick with the scent of burning oil, clients squinting to find their assigned room, shadows stretching across the graffiti-scratched plaster. Privacy was thin, but darkness offered its own kind of shield. Historians still argue whether the dim lighting was intentional, a mood setter designed to blur imperfections, or simply a byproduct of limited technology. Was the gloom part of the experience, making the brothel feel more alluring? Or was it just a practical reality of an ancient city without glass windows or steady fuel supplies? You step forward, imagining how the brothel might have looked when fully lit, the frescoes glowing faintly, voices echoing in half-darkness. The scene feels at once theatrical and claustrophobic. Every lamp flame must have been another heartbeat of the building itself, keeping the lupanar alive long into the night. And just for a moment, as you picture the flicker of that ancient light, you can almost feel it warming your cheek, as though a lamp forgotten by time is still burning just for you. You pause near a doorway, imagining not the painted walls or flickering lamps this time, but the people themselves, especially the workers who made their living here. Unlike the nameless figures in the frescoes, these were real women with voices, laughter, and probably a healthy dose of sarcasm about their day-to-day routines. Mainstream fact, many of the prostitutes in Pompeii's lupanar were enslaved or freed women working under the control of a manager or owner. In Roman society, sex work was legal but stigmatized, and those who performed it were often classified as infames, stripped of certain civic rights. Quirky tidbit, some women working here carved their own names into the walls, leaving behind graffiti like Murtis Delights or Fabia was here. Imagine clocking into your shift and deciding, you know what? I'm branding myself directly onto the plaster for eternity. That's ancient marketing with a personal touch. You imagine their daily rhythm, perhaps waking early, fetching water, tending lamps, waiting for the steady trickle of clients. For many, this was not glamorous work, but survival, a transaction repeated until the eruption froze their world in place. And yet, scholars note that some graffiti carries hints of pride or playfulness, suggesting these women weren't always voiceless victims, but active participants in shaping how they were remembered. Historians still argue whether brothel workers in Pompeii had any real autonomy. Some evidence suggests strict control by pimps or owners, while other fragments hint at women forming bonds, building reputations, and even negotiating their own arrangements. The truth likely varied from person to person, room to room. You let that thought linger. How many jokes were shared in these halls? How many whispered secrets? How many eye rolls at clumsy patrons? The lupanar wasn't just a workplace. It was a stage of countless small human moments, many of which will never be written in stone. And for a second, as you picture their laughter echoing faintly through the narrow rooms, you realize history isn't just about ruins. It's about the people who once filled them, even if only in fragments of graffiti and ghostly memories. You linger in the hallway a little longer, this time turning your thoughts toward the people who entered the Lupanar not to work, but to pay. Who exactly were the clients stepping through this narrow doorway, clinking coins in their hands and squinting at frescoes in the dim light? Mainstream fact: Pompeii was a bustling port town, and the brothel drew customers from every walk of life. Sailors fresh from the docks, merchants stopping between trades, soldiers on leave, even local townsmen who slipped away from their villas. The legal status of brothels meant visiting wasn't necessarily illegal, but it certainly wasn't something you'd boast about at dinner with the in-laws. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists once found graffiti that essentially works as a review system, like a primitive Yelp. One inscription praises a worker as the best in the whole place, while another just states flatly that the food was better than the service. Imagine a Roman client thinking 2 stars, would not recommend, and carving it for eternity. You can almost hear the shuffle of sandals outside the entrance, men debating whether to spend their coins on wine or on an hour in one of the small stone rooms. Some clients might have come nervously, unsure what to expect, while others were probably repeat visitors who knew the staff by name. The experience must have been as varied as the people themselves. Historians still argue whether brothels in Pompeii catered mostly to poorer classes, laborers, sailors, freedmen, or whether wealthier elites occasionally slipped in as well. The evidence leans toward mixed clientele, with prices affordable enough for commoners, but settings intriguing enough to tempt others. You picture the line of visitors stretching through the doorways over the years, each one leaving behind a trace, whether in coins, in graffiti, or in memory, and it strikes you. Just like any public spot in any city, the Lupanar wasn't just a building. It was a crossroads where lives intersected, however briefly, and where history was written in countless invisible ways. You wander toward the end of the corridor, and there, tucked in an alcove, you spot something crucial to the whole operation: a latrine. Because of course, where there are people, there are bodily needs, and the Romans were nothing if not practical about plumbing. The Lupanar's facilities might not impress you by modern standards, but they reveal how the building functioned as a miniature world unto itself. Mainstream fact: Roman brothels, like houses and bathhouses, often had direct connections to the city's sewer system. Archaeological digs in Pompeii uncovered a small toilet in the Lupanar, with waste carried away through terracotta pipes into larger drains beneath the streets. Quirky tidbit: researchers analyzing the latrine sediment discovered food remains, fish bones, olive pits, and bits of bread. That means clients and workers were probably snacking right here in the brothel. Imagine finishing your salted fish appetizer, then wandering into one of the side rooms. Not exactly fine dining, but definitely a 2-for-1 venue. You imagine the smell mingling with lamp smoke and human bodies, a cocktail of odors the frescoes couldn't disguise. Privacy in the toilet wasn't much better than in the bedrooms. A simple bench with a hole would have served, maybe a shared sponge on a stick for cleaning. Yes, the famous tersorium. Suddenly, scented candles don't sound like such a modern luxury. Historians still argue whether the presence of food remains in the latrine indicates casual meals for the workers, or if some clients treated the brothel as a hangout spot, a place to eat, drink, and socialize before or after business. It may have been less a quick stop and more a lively hub woven into Pompeii's nightlife. You stand there, trying not to picture too vividly the logistics of shared sponges, and it makes you smile. Because no matter how grand or gritty the Roman world could be, it was always stubbornly human. Even in the Lupanar, between frescoes and flirtations, someone was inevitably asking, "Where's the bathroom?" You retrace your steps, passing the cramped rooms and fading frescoes, and you realize how seamlessly this little building plugged into the larger city. The Lupanar wasn't an isolated den tucked away in secret. It sat right in the flow of Pompeii's streets, its doorway as ordinary as any tavern or shop. Stepping outside, you can almost hear the clatter of carts on stone, the shouts of vendors, and the laughter spilling from wine bars only a few steps away. Mainstream fact: Pompeii's Lupanar stood in a busy district close to bakeries, taverns, and even a public fountain. Archaeologists note that its location made it convenient for sailors, traders, and townspeople passing through the neighborhood. In other words, it was part of the city's daily rhythm, not hidden in the shadows. Quirky tidbit: one nearby wall in the street still carries carved phallic symbols, pointing like cheeky road signs toward the brothel. It's as if the city installed its own ancient version of Google Maps. Arrows and icons leading you to your destination. No Wi-Fi required. You stand at the threshold, half inside and half out, realizing the lupanar was woven into the fabric of Pompeian life. Workers fetch water from the fountain, neighbors walk past the doorway without much fuss, and clients slipped in while others pretended not to notice. It wasn't an exotic outpost, it was a business operating right in the heart of the community. Historians still argue whether Pompeians viewed the lupanar as scandalous or simply practical. Some evidence suggests tolerance, even humor, with graffiti and street signs showing open acknowledgement. Others argue it was stigmatized, tolerated only because it kept certain behaviors out of more respectable households. The truth, as always, probably lived somewhere in between. And as you look out at the bustling imaginary street, you sense how ordinary it all was. How even something that might seem shocking to us now was, for them, just another part of the city's everyday hum. You step fully outside now, blinking as if the sun of ancient Pompeii is still pouring down, bright and relentless. The street feels alive in your imagination, lined with shops, taverns, and noisy vendors calling out their wares. And tucked casually among them, the lupanar looks less like some scandalous den, and more like just another business front. Mainstream fact: prostitution in Rome wasn't only legal, it was regulated. Workers were supposed to register with local authorities, paying a tax, and sometimes even keeping official records. Inscriptions elsewhere in the empire mention lists of names, as though intimacy was just another item to be filed alongside grain shipments and wine sales. Quirky tidbit: the Roman state occasionally taxed sex work directly, making it one of the more unusual sources of public revenue. Imagine walking up to a tax collector and announcing your earnings in the least discreet way possible. Filing your taxes has never been fun, but at least you don't have to explain that line item. The legality didn't erase stigma, though. Workers were legally categorized as infames, the same label given to actors and gladiators. They could live and work openly, but society marked them as outsiders, never quite equal to respectable citizens. You picture someone leaving the brothel, pulling their cloak up around their face, hoping to avoid recognition on the street. Historians still argue whether Pompeii's community truly accepted the brothel as an ordinary business or tolerated it as a necessary vice. Some scholars suggest that graffiti and phallic street markers prove a casual, even humorous attitude. Others believe these signs mask a deeper disapproval. A society that allowed the practice but always kept its workers on the margins. As you watch the imagined crowd shuffle past, you see the contradictions laid bare. Here was a trade both legal and lucrative, yet forever marked with a stain. It's a tension that stretches across time, lingering in every society that debates where to draw the line between business and morality. And somehow, here in Pompeii, those tensions are frozen in stone, still visible on the street corner outside the lupanar. You drift along the stone-paved street, watching the bustle of Pompeii as though it's happening right now. Merchants shout over each other, children dart between stalls, and the clatter of wooden wheels rattles across uneven cobblestones. Somewhere in the crowd, you spot men and women who you know must have been regulars at the lupanar, blending seamlessly with bakers, sailors, and politicians. The line between ordinary citizen and frequent visitor is practically invisible. Mainstream fact: Roman men were not judged harshly for visiting brothels. As long as they were citizens maintaining their household duties, such trips were often brushed off as casual indulgences. In fact, many Roman writers, including poets, joked openly about lupanar visits, as if they were no more scandalous than going to the tavern. Quirky tidbit, phallic symbols carved into the streets weren't just graffiti, they sometimes acted like actual arrows, pointing customers toward the lupanar. You imagine a poor tourist following those cheeky stone carvings like some sort of ancient GPS. Recalculating in 3 paces, turn left at the giant stone anatomy. Yet the contrast between humor and reality nags at you. Workers inside lived under rules that made them both visible and invisible, present in every joke, every painted symbol, every whispered story, but officially barred from certain forms of social respect. Their customers could laugh and walk away. The women stayed behind, their lives circumscribed by walls of stone and laws of Rome. Historians still argue whether Pompeians saw brothels as a place of everyday leisure, or whether they carried more weight, a darker, almost shadow economy tolerated because it kept desires contained. Some point to the frequency of graffiti and murals, suggesting casual acceptance. Others insist that humor and decoration might have been ways to mask underlying discomfort. You wander on, the street buzzing around you, and realize the lupanar wasn't some hidden corner. It was part of the living, breathing map of Pompeii. Just another stop, etched into stone and memory, pointing toward pleasures and paradoxes that refuse to vanish, even under layers of volcanic ash. You find yourself imagining the brothel not as a dusty ruin, but as a working business in the full blaze of a Pompeian afternoon. Outside, laughter spills from taverns, the smell of baked bread drifts from ovens, and the hum of bargaining echoes down narrow alleys. The lupanar is right there in the mix, doors open, customers stepping in and out, as ordinary as the fishmonger 2 doors down. Mainstream fact. Historians estimate Pompeii housed roughly 25 brothels, ranging from large, purpose-built structures like the famous lupanar to smaller, backroom setups tucked inside inns. That means the city of around 10,000, 12,000 residents had no shortage of options for those seeking such services. Quirky tidbit, some brothel entrances were apparently marked with crude paintings or even dangling wind chimes made of bronze shaped like, you guessed it, phallic charms. The Romans believed such jingling trinkets warded off bad luck, which must have been quite the greeting for customers ducking inside. But the workers themselves were not free to come and go as they pleased. Many were enslaved, rented, or owned outright by a lino or lina, male or female pimps who treated the trade like any other investment. Others may have worked independently, paying a cut to use the space, though their social standing remained precarious. Historians still argue whether some workers could achieve financial independence over time. A handful of epitaphs from elsewhere in the empire hint at freed women who saved enough to buy their freedom, but whether this was common or an exceptional fluke is unclear. The tension between dream and reality lingers in every cracked wall of the Pompeian lupanar. You pause in your stroll, picturing a line of men waiting their turn while a Leno counts coins with the casual focus of a shopkeeper tallying bread loaves. Business was business, and in Pompeii, this one operated in daylight, no secrecy required. The air shifts as evening settles over the cobbled streets, and the lupanar takes on a different rhythm. In the daytime, customers might sneak in for a quick visit between errands, but at night the atmosphere deepens, the chatter grows louder, and the glow of oil lamps makes the frescoes shimmer. The brothel becomes a stage where men, merchants, sailors, freedmen, maybe even the odd senator on holiday, slip into roles they wouldn't dare play in the forum. Mainstream fact. Roman law technically did not outlaw prostitution. In fact, the state regulated it through registration. Prostitutes, whether streetwalkers or brothel workers, were expected to register with the aediles, local magistrates, and were branded with the legal status of infames. This term marked them as dishonorable, stripping them of certain rights, though it did not prevent them from operating. Quirky tidbit, some names of registered prostitutes survive on wax tablets, tucked among receipts for bread and wine. Imagine your local grocery store also filing your part-time side hustle. Bureaucracy has a way of making everything boring, even in ancient Pompeii. Historians still argue whether Pompeii's prostitutes were required to pay taxes on their earnings. Some evidence suggests the imperial treasury collected fees from sex workers, just like from tavern keepers, while others think the records are too murky to be conclusive. If true, though, it means the Roman state quite literally profited from the world's oldest profession. You lean against a stone doorway, imagining the nightly scene, torches flickering, the sound of sandals on pavement, a group of sailors staggering in, their pay burning a hole in their purses. Behind them, a local freedman grumbles about his wife's cooking and decides he'll spend tonight's dinner money on something a little less practical. The brothel keeper smiles. Business is booming. It's easy to see how this corner of Pompeii became not just tolerated, but woven into daily life. As you slip deeper into the imagined Pompeian night, the streets thin out, yet the Lupanar still hums with energy. The real traffic now comes from those who can afford leisure. Traders flush from good sales, gamblers lucky at dice, or visitors drifting in from ships docked at the nearby port. A steady trickle of footsteps heads toward the little building with its stone beds and painted walls. Mainstream fact: the average cost of a visit was strikingly low. Ancient graffiti suggests anywhere from 2 to 16 asses, the small bronze coins of daily trade. To give you scale, that could be cheaper than a loaf of decent bread, or about the same price as a cup of watered wine at a tavern. In other words, accessible to nearly everyone. Quirky tidbit. One inscription in Pompeii even brags about a man who claimed to have got the best service for a single coin. Whether that was a deal of the century or just a boast scribbled after too much wine is anyone's guess. Imagine Yelp reviews carved into stone. 5 stars would recommend. Historians still argue whether the pricing system reflected a tiered market. Some suggest wealthier clients sought out more luxurious settings in villas or private rooms, while the Lupanar remained a budget-friendly option for the masses. Others think even elites occasionally popped into the common houses more out of convenience than cost. You picture yourself shuffling along the stone-paved road, coins clinking in your hand, calculating whether tonight's indulgence will leave enough left over for bread tomorrow. The choice seems both ordinary and oddly consequential, like buying fast food on the way home, except this food happens to come with fresco advertisements and a permanent stain on your legal reputation. Inside, the brothel keeper is busy counting those same small bronze coins, proof that the steady flow of customers keeps this enterprise thriving. You let yourself drift through another doorway, where the air feels thicker, warmer, filled with murmurs and laughter that echo off stone walls. The night has deepened, and the Lupanar has reached its busiest rhythm, like a tavern at peak hour. Clients rub shoulders with strangers, coins pass hands in shadowed corners, and someone occasionally bursts out with a half-drunk song that fades into chuckles. Mainstream fact: Roman brothels were supervised establishments, not chaotic free-for-alls. The keeper, often a freedman or freedwoman, maintained order, ensured payments, and sometimes even matched clients with available workers. The business was taxed, regulated, and documented, woven firmly into Pompeii's economy. Quirky tidbit: among the recovered graffiti are surprisingly blunt schedules. One carved line brags, "On June 15th, I had her for 2 asses." Imagine leaving behind not only your name, but also a diary entry of questionable pride, scratched into plaster. It's less diary of a wimpy kid, and more diary of a too much wine. Historians still argue whether the workers themselves had much autonomy. Some evidence suggests that women could keep a portion of their earnings and occasionally even build enough savings to gain freedom or property. Others propose that most lived under the strict control of a pimp or brothel manager with little say in their circumstances. You notice the ebb and flow of clients. Some arrive with swagger, others with nervous glances. A few linger longer, talking too loudly about chariot races or politics, pretending they came here just for the conversation. It's like the ancient version of saying you only went to a diner for the Wi-Fi. The keeper's watchful eyes follow the exchanges, ensuring that no one leaves without paying. And you, still half imaginary and half observant, realize the hum of commerce blends seamlessly with the intimacy on offer. This is not chaos, it's business, routine, profitable, and strangely ordinary. You move further inside, and the sounds sharpen into separate threads. A laugh here, the rustle of linen, the scrape of sandals against stone. The crowding creates a strange intimacy, as though everyone is both participant and witness. Torchlight flickers across the frescoes, making the painted figures shift as if alive, replaying the same eternal poses for each new set of eyes. Mainstream fact: Roman culture was relatively open about sexuality compared to later European societies. Erotic imagery decorated not just brothels, but even some private homes, bathhouses, and drinking establishments. For Romans, such art could signal fertility, prosperity, or simply amusement. Quirky tidbit: in Pompeii, small bronze amulets shaped like male genitals, called fascina, were worn as charms for good luck and protection against the evil eye. Imagine gifting someone a keychain shaped like that, insisting it's for safety. The humor of daily life wasn't always subtle. Historians still argue whether clients of the lupanar were mostly locals or if sailors, merchants, and travelers made up the bulk of the business. With Pompeii's bustling port just down the road, the stream of foreigners would have brought not just money, but also gossip, news, and probably some questionable fashion choices. As you lean against the cool stone wall, you watch a man count out his bronze asses with exaggerated care, like he's negotiating a palace treaty instead of a knight in a cramped stone cubicle. Another client emerges, adjusting his tunic, whistling like he just won the chariot lottery. The workers move with practiced efficiency, some chatting lightly, others silent and reserved, their lives as much performance as labor. And through it all, you sense the blending of commerce and pleasure, the way a mundane transaction becomes a moment wrapped in secrecy, laughter, and the faint smell of oil lamps burning low. The night presses on, and the atmosphere inside the lupanar begins to mellow. The earliest clients, flush with drink, have staggered back to taverns or narrow beds at home. What remains now is a quieter flow. Men who linger, workers who stretch tired limbs, and the occasional couple sneaking in as if sharing a forbidden adventure. Mainstream fact: brothels in Pompeii were typically modest in size, often with around 10 rooms. Beds were stone platforms, sometimes with straw or cloth coverings. Comfort wasn't exactly the selling point, it was more about speed, affordability, and privacy. Luxury, if desired, was reserved for private villas or elite courtesans in Rome. Quirky tidbit: one graffito scrawled on a wall records a playful insult. Maritimus the sailor did it here with success. The casual tone makes it sound less like a scandal and more like carving your initials into a tree. An oddly cheerful record of a fleeting night. Historians still argue whether women from outside Pompeii ever worked in the lupanar. Some names suggest origins from Greece, Syria, or Egypt, which would have added exotic appeal for local clients. But whether these women were voluntary migrants seeking income or captives pushed into labor remains an open question. You find yourself imagining how claustrophobic those tiny rooms must have felt, especially when filled with torch smoke and laughter leaking through thin walls. The building breathes like a living creature, every cough, whisper, and coin clink reverberating into its bones. A client brushes past you, smelling of wine and sea salt, muttering thanks to no one in particular. The keeper yawns as he tidies his ledgers, noting down the flow of coins. The pace has slowed, but the business hums on, steady as the beating of Pompeii's restless heart. By now, the moon sits high, silver light spilling over Pompeii's rooftops, while inside the lupanar, the flames of oil lamps gutter lower. The rush of earlier hours has thinned into something quieter, a rhythm of low voices, the shuffle of sandals, and the clink of a few last coins. You sense the workers growing tired, leaning against doorways or stretching sore shoulders between visits. Mainstream fact: Roman law technically recognized prostitutes as registered professionals, but their legal and social standing was sharply limited. They were barred from marrying into respectable families, excluded from civic honors, and often trapped in a cycle that made upward mobility difficult. Even so, some still managed to earn enough to buy freedom or property. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient good luck graffiti scribbled by clients, sometimes including crude stick figures or random doodles. It's the equivalent of carving smiley faces in a bathroom stall, human boredom finding an outlet even in a brothel. Historians still argue whether the women themselves decorated their small stone rooms. Some think they added simple touches, cloths, perfumes, charms to soften the space. Others believe the starkness of the cubicles was intentional, a way for the brothel to remain impersonal, like a revolving door business. The truth likely sat somewhere in between. As you hover in this imagined space, you notice the weary routine that's taken hold. One man carefully counts change before leaving, as if worried the keeper might short him. Another stretches, groans, and slips out into the night air, tugging his cloak tight against the chill. The energy is no longer playful but steady, like a tavern closing down, where the laughter has quieted into murmurs and yawns. Even in its most human moments, the lupanar remains, above all else, a place of business. The night winds down, and the lupanar begins to exhale its last breath of energy. Oil lamps burn low, shadows stretching across frescoed walls that now seem almost drowsy in their flickering light. The keeper tallies coins one final time, scratching figures onto a wax tablet, while workers retreat into their cubicles, some resting, others quietly chatting in the dim. The streets outside grow hushed, save for the occasional bark of a dog or the creak of a cart rolling toward the port. Mainstream fact, Pompeii's brothels, like taverns, close their doors at nightfall, though not always at the same hour. The city's rhythms depended on curfews, festivals, and the whims of its inhabitants. In many cases, such establishments were among the first to open and the last to shutter. Quirky tidbit, graffiti left behind in the lupanar includes not only crude boasts, but also tiny doodles of gladiators, animals, and even random geometric shapes. Signs that someone, perhaps bored between visits, picked up a stylus and left a little piece of themselves behind. Historians still argue whether these inscriptions reflect the voices of clients, workers, or even the keeper himself. Were they marketing memory or mere idle scribbles? The walls never answer, though they whisper fragments of hundreds of lives once lived. You stand in the doorway as the brothel's hum quiets into silence. The night air is cool, carrying the scent of the sea. You glance back one last time. The frescoes frozen in eternal poses, the walls still heavy with laughter, sighs and coins that once clinked across their stone floors. And slowly now, the narration itself softens, unwinding like the last torch guttering into darkness. The rooms of Pompeii fall away. The sounds dissolve into the gentle hush of night. You feel the rhythm of your own breath slowing, as though you too are closing up shop after a long day. Let your mind drift as the city fades. The stones grow still, the frescoes blur, and all the noise of ancient business settles into quiet. Nothing presses on you now. Nothing rushes. Only a steady calm, as steady as the sea that once lapped against Pompeii's shores. Here you can rest. The world outside waits, but for now you need only drift. Inhale, exhale, like the lamps dimming, like the walls sighing into silence. Let the ancient laughter fade into background hum, leaving you light, comfortable, and safe. Sleep comes as gently as torch smoke curling upward. The city stills, the voices fade, and you are free to let go.